My last job before I came to Filter Labs, I was at the Pentagon. And so I was there through some of the all-domain anomaly resolution office, ARROW stuff, a lot of the declassifications, some of the Hill testimonies. How has that kind of opening of the books, per se, influence the community?
I think that people have been waiting for so long, 75 years or more, to be able just to see this happen within politics and within government and to have these types of conversations. So really, I've made a joke on News Nation where I this is game day. Like I always say, it really is. It's kind of like the Super Bowl for UFOs to be able to watch this happening in government. Now, does it mean that everything that's going in front of the Pentagon and everything going in front of Congress really accurate? We don't know, but I think we will find out. My typical read on things like that is generally 20 to 25 years. So I'm 41. So when I'm 61, we'll probably know more about those hearings and the declassification and what actually happened.
Welcome to Navigating Noise, the Filter Labs podcast. I'm Erol Yayboke, and again for Jonathan. Today, we have Chrissy Newton. Chrissy, I feel like you seem to defy encapsulation into even a few titles, so I'm going to give a quick stab at it. You're the founder of, I believe, VOCAB Communication. You're the host of the Rebelliously Curious podcast, which is a great podcast, and a regular contributor to The Debrief. And you're also the co-host of Discovery Channel's new show, Alien Encounters, Fact or Fiction. Chrissy, welcome to Navigating Noise.
Thank you for having me. And all of that is accurate. So thank you.
What did I miss?
Nothing in that. I'm a partner at The Debrief, but really it's kind of in semantics in its own place. But I'm, I just write and I podcast there. And I've just recently done a TV show on the Discovery Channel. So it's been a whirlwind, that's for sure.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that TV show.
It's been, close to a year now, but it's myself and Mitch Horowitz, and we talk to people that have had all different types of UFO or just any type of experience that's paranormal. And my job, I come from a data analytics perspective, and I come from a journalistic perspective. And with a group of people, we analyze each person that we interview, their data that they've come back with. So it might be like a photo, it could be a video, it could just be a testimonial. And we try to find my side evidence to not disprove it, but try to understand it. Because I know a lot of people will be like, well, she's just debunking. And to be honest, I don't have a problem with debunkers because I think we need them in any form of community, right? They help us kind of guide us to what potentially could not just belief, something that is actually potentially practical, right? So my job is to work with these data analysts, and we look at the evidence that we have, and then I come to a conclusion along with Mitch Horowitz if we think it's a UFO or not, or depending on what type of experience that they've had. It's a fun little show. It's different than your regular show. It's got a little bit of a Maury Povich 80s feel to it, though,
Oh, I
which
love
I think
that.
is kind of interesting. Yeah, it's very much like who's the dad after the DNA test. I think and the most important thing I think is in the show outside of data analytics is just more of the psychology, so the soft science that I think producers didn't realize if they're not deep into the topic, where I said, we kind of have to hold people very differently here and hold space for them differently here because I don't know how they're going to react. Right. I'm this Simon Cowell of UFOs right now. And who knows if I'm going to get water thrown in my face or a drink, or, someone doesn't like the fact that I've told them that what they saw isn't what they think it is. And that's really hard to hear. Some people are really committed to what they believe and what they see, and being told something different, they don't want to know the difference, or they don't care. So that I was a little more concerned about how people would react. But all in all, I think it was general kind of reactions that most people would imagine you would see. Thank gosh, no drink throwing, right? Thankfully.
Well, that's stay tuned for season 2, I guess.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So Filter Labs, we're a data analytics firm, and we use all sorts of tools, AI and other tools, to try to get the signal through the noise. And so what you're talking about there is you're trying to figure out what that thing was, that photo, that sound, that video. And so you talked about, you're a data person. So what types of data are you looking at, and how are you, without giving secrets away, we want people to go to Discovery and watch the show, but how do you think about data analysis in that context?
You can look at it in many different perspectives. You have the 5 observables that have come out of, the UFO task force, right, that we can look at. But then and we don't really use them in the show. I did actually speak to everyone about them, but we decided, or the producers, I should say, decided not to include it. I think that was maybe too much of inside baseball.
We love inside baseball here, so
I do too, and so and so the what we really did come up with, though, is I would say is a general formula that most people could, wrap their head around, but also then, do themselves. So looking for basic things like photo evidence, video evidence, and testimony, right? Those are really important. Looking at social media, seeing if there's a mass sighting that's happened, what news reports have come out, if other people have similar testimonials, if they've seen the same experience, and cross referencing those along with UFO databases. And that could just be, if it's satellites, if it could be from past UFO databases from a historical perspective and a cultural perspective. So those were the basics that we generally used, and then time and location as well, obviously. And those were the kind of base that we used so that most people could go do all that analytics themselves. And funny enough, on my Twitter, I recently, was doing that. There's a UFO sighting in Toronto, and I literally lived down the street from it, and it was a black, yeah, it was a black triangle UFO, and I was like, "Is this CGI? Like, is this AI?" And I put it out, and I think close to 1.8 thousand people, or yeah, like close to, sorry, 2,000 people decided to and wanted more as well. And so we were all kind of figuring this out together, which is interesting. So I drove by the location at that night 2 nights ago and took a video and said, well, they were like, it has to be this crane. And I said, no, it's not the crane. The crane's too low in the shot compared to where they were actually standing. And the video was shot the 2 days before because of the weather patterns were the same. So it was just, you end up doing it yourself. But it looked like a UFO, like it legitly did. And it was pretty close to them. And it's been, and then I've been trying to contact the person now because they weren't properly tagged in the Instagram account. So now I'm trying to track who the person is, along with then, I've contacted the media outlet that shared it on social media. So, you use it in your regular day stuff. So I found myself doing it anyway. Yeah.
yeah, no, that's really interesting. I wonder if you're more, attuned to these types of things. I probably don't even look up at night. The degree to which I'm out at night anymore, having 2 little kids, is not all that often, but I will, after this conversation, I will look up more at night. The format of your show is really interesting. The Maury Povich style of it is really intriguing to me. And, y- you know, I feel like maybe 10, 15 years ago, we would have been in this place where it's like, just tell people the facts and then they'll like believe you and then you can move on to the next thing. But I think the sort of UFO community, a lot of what's happening, you're in Canada, but you know a lot about the US, a lot about what's happening in the US right now politically. It's just, there's so many emotions that are involved in this. And so when you get to that end part of your show, and even broader, when you're talking about kind of like presenting facts, like, no, actually there is a rational explanation for something like this, how do people react? How do you think about communicating that to people?
It's hard. The first thing I said is, you don't want to tell anybody, not that they're wrong. If they're lying, I'd obviously be happy to tell them that if they're lying to us, right? But what people believe is so important, and intrinsically what they believe in, how they perceive reality is so important. My job is not to gaslight anybody here. It's just to hopefully offer a space where we can have a dialogue where we can talk about what this evidence might mean, but what it means to them is so different than what it means to me, because it might not be emotionally affecting me. Some of these stories were driven through past deceased parents, so you saw that they were really driven in emotions of loss, right? And that was so sad to see in so many ways, where there was so much grief. And a part of me, I can't say to somebody after a show, please go to a grief counselor. If I was a producer on the show, I would have had a psychologist on set, personally, in my perspective, to talk to people after, because some of these scenarios were deeply embedded into family experiences, thinking they've seen a past dad or heard a past father in their head, and then saw a UFO related what they thought was a UFO, but actually was the ISS. So you have these like really distinct conversations with them, and you're really talking about what they think is reality, right? So that was really challenging. The other thing too is that I come off very clinical in the show. I'm not really that clinical in real life. Like they made me really go to a stock character more in that perspective where, it was good cop, bad cop. I was the bad cop. And so Mitch Horowitz, comes from more of a cultural, lighter perspective. So, interesting changing of the times, or maybe not. The women's always the hard one. But I think they maybe thought that a woman would be able to deliver these verdicts per se much easier than a man. So that's the choice, and I'm not exactly why they chose a woman for that perspective, but so I do come off a little clinical. But behind the scenes, I was talking to a lot of people after for a while about their experience because I was deeply interested, and also saying, if you feel that we are wrong, then please like go search other people to look at your evidence, right? It's just challenging. You don't want to hurt people, that's for sure.
Zooming out a little bit on the community itself, I my last job before I came to Filter Labs, I was at the Pentagon, and so I was there through some of the all domain anomaly resolution office arrow stuff, a lot of the declassification, some of the Hill testimonies, um, and so how has that kind of opening of the books, per se, influence the community, the I don't wanna call them believers, but, like, the community of practice out there that looks at these types of UAPs and UFOs.
For sure. I call it a counterculture. I look at the UFO space not as a subculture, as a counterculture. Technically, it probably could be viewed as both because the UFO culture comes sub from the mainstream pop culture. It's derived from it. But counterculture is generally d- designed to be a movement or described as a movement. So the women's liberation movement is a counterculture. The cannabis movement is a counterculture movement. Drag is a counterculture movement. And I think UFOs are, because UFOs are fighting for the people that are within the UFO community. Outside of that, behind it, are fighting for transparency. And they're fighting most of the time. I think people are fighting for transparency. And that would be part of a movement. And that could be government transparency, societal transparency, many different things, and also changing of laws, right, and policy. And to me, that screams counterculture, right? But this is a global counterculture. It's interesting. I think cannabis has a similar ring to it, for the fact that it's just international, right? You don't have to be a gender or a race. To be able to, like the civil rights movement, obviously, is a counterculture movement. You don't have to be a race or a gender to be able to find yourself in this community. So with the stuff in the Pentagon, which I think is really cool that you were there. So like, congratulations. What a great time to be sitting, working in government doing that. It's so interesting and so fun. Uh, I think that it's people have been waiting for so long, 75 years or more, to be able just to see this happen within politics and within government, and to have these types of conversations. So really, I've made a joke on News Nation where I like, this is game day. Like I always say, it really is. It's kind of like the Super Bowl for UFOs, to be able to watch this happening in government. Now, does it mean that everything that's going in front of the Pentagon and everything going in front of Congress really accurate? We don't know, but I think we will find out. My typical read on things like that is generally 20 to 25 years. So I'm 41. So when I'm like 61, we'll probably know more about those hearings and the declassification and what actually happened. Like right now we're hearing more about 9/11, right? And that was like 25 years ago, I believe. I feel old. Right? And so yeah, I think that will happen, and I think it's really exciting. I'm glad I am the age I'm now so that I can understand it. I can participate in it and use my even just talents that I've had, even just outside of broadcasting and podcasting, to be able to contribute to hopefully shifting or contributing to ideals to bring awareness in many different ways from a communications comms perspective, because I think that's what we can do. It doesn't mean that everybody's right or wrong, but we will sort through that information but we need to put it out there, and we've done that. And I think that that's remarkable for a counterculture to be able to move this that was considered a conspiracy theories for a very long time.
I think that's right. But for the sake of full disclosure, I didn't work for Arrow, but I was certainly around it and aware of what it was doing. And I think the Biden Harris administration was, I think, just interested in transparency broadly. And there are things that we won't talk about on a public podcast that should not be shared with the public, that are, for very good national security reasons, that's not a thing that you want people to know. A vast majority of that stuff, I mean, I read the report, that was really a vast majority of that stuff is pretty easily explainable, and there wasn't really a reason that it was so highly classified. So I think this sort of push for transparency, hopefully that kind of set a bar that we will now, even, future generations of folks there will even seek to exceed. That's certainly my hope. You mentioned the storytelling aspect, and I think this is what makes you a very interesting person in this moment in time, is that you're a sort of decaffeinated data analyst, but you're also obviously a very good storyteller, and you run your own PR firm. And so, you know, y- you're also existing now in a sector, in a type of communication that there's been a lot of scrutiny, there's been a lot of doubt. And so how do you think about communicating with your PR hat on? How do you think about communicating some of those messages, and for your clients, getting them to where they need to go?
From this perspective, like working, I've been very lucky because I've been able to work with Jacques Vallée for the past 2 books, doing PR with him. I've obviously do the PR with the debrief when we need to have that. So it depends on who's our audience, if it's the UFO based audience, um, or just government too. It really just depends on who that might be. So I'll give you an example with Jacques Vallée. You know, obviously has his book Trinity, and so that has tons of scrutiny around it, if it actually happened or not, right? And Jacques very committed to his evidence and very committed to the testimonies that he has. So, my job is not to tell Jacques Vallée he's wrong. That's not my place. My place is to be able to help put that comms out there, from him, which I do respect him. If I didn't think that Jacques obviously didn't have any merit, I wouldn't work with him, right? I wouldn't PR something like that just from a moral perspective. But he does. He's amazing at what he does. So when looking at that, the stuff that we did review was looking at the news sector and saying, hey, can we combine this with policy? Can we push this out and talk about, Roswell was the first case that they were looking back to, but they actually went back to 1945 instead. And so they included Trinity in that review as well, or was something that they were considering. So that really helped when we were doing PR and pushing it, because we created a lot of noise, and the New York Times picked it up and the Daily Mail picked it up. And then, unfortunately, Tucker Carlson picked it up. And lots of other outlets that did it. It went syndicated. But the idea was to really talk about policy and how far we should go back and look at. And potentially Trinity was the first UFO crash case, allegedly. So let's look at it. Let's look at the reviews. Let's let government look at the evidence and the data, and to be able to come back and say, well, maybe potentially this did happen, or at least added into their reports, or added into the knowledge base that they have while they're looking at UFOs now. So I think that there's many different ways to have comms. It just depends on your audience. It depends on your direction, and it depends on your goal. Our goal was, it's nice that we ended up getting to help contribute and shift legislation, but it's what's getting the Trinity case out there so that people know that this potentially did happen, and we need to be mindful of it. And there's one survival still around that's was from the Holocaust. And so it's a story. So that, I think there's tons of different ways that you can look at coming to this topic and speaking about it. But I think you do have to come, no matter what, as one pillar is stick with transparency. Because if you don't have transparency or you're not transparent as a company in this space or anything else, you'll just get eaten alive. And rightfully so. It's a cultural pillar. And if you want to get into UFOs and you're a company and you're not transparent, just you're better off walking away from the space.
Yeah, it sounds like you'd probably get eaten alive.
More than other companies, surprisingly.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah, like, the UFO community will rip you apart quicker than any community I've ever seen in PR, and it's not in a bad way. They will look you up, they will they will fact check you, they will look to see if you're actually saying what you're saying. If you're not, they'll call you out on it. Like, it's so great. I appreciate that because you can't mess around. And don't get me wrong, there's people that are always gonna say bad things because they want to, but people that really do care about this topic will shine a light on it. And there's lots of companies that have tried to come into this space and say, "Well, I'm not gonna be the CEO and put my name forward. I'm gonna go under an alias. Everyone in the company's under an alias." And you're like, "You can't do that. That's not the point of UAP counterculture. One of the pillars is transparency. And so that company hasn't done well because everyone has said, well, why would I use these products? Because I don't think that I don't even know who the owner is. How do I know that they're taking my data and what are they going to do with all of this? So you have to be transparent. And I think that that is a good model moving forward for any company to look at, especially in an online community as strong as the UFO one is.
I'm going back to the beginning of this conversation because you said something that just made me think, why is this community such a passionate community?
Well, I think it has a few things. You have stories, you have victims, you have experiencers, you have government politics. A big part of it for me, I think, is you have a lot of people that have been deeply hurt by the government in the past. We've seen that with Project Beta. We've seen that, there's been tons of people that have been victims out of projects that have happened throughout the CIA and the government, not like consistently, but they've happened, right? So I think there's people saying like, this isn't right. You can't do that to people. And let's be honest, if that was your dad or your parent or anyone else, I'd be screaming from the hilltops too. You can't, I think people forget that there's so many real casualties and human casualties that happen within the American government or any governments around the world, that people's lives just get affected by programs and they could lose parents from it. And that's devastating. And if you've never lost a parent or you've never lost anyone in your life, maybe your empathy would be low for that. But it's real and you don't want anyone to go through that. And I think the other part is that people are sick of being lied to. They want to understand what is going on, what is reality, what is, what to believe, are they safe, are they protected? Because this is no joke. Like if UFOs are actually taking people and some form of dimension or interdimensional being or whatever it may be that we hear, if any of that's true, your national security's out the door. So people really want to understand and live in a space where they feel free. And I think that that's why it's so passionate. Plus you have like 75 years of or more of generations after generations just wanting to be able to find out the secret, which I think is so cool. Like it's cool to be part of a community that's been doing it for that long and they're so passionate about it, which is nice.
Yeah, I mean, from a national security perspective, I hope that there's not interstellar, beings that are kidnapping our folks and bringing them back and all of that. I certainly hope that's not true. Um, Talked a little bit about, the debrief not only covers the issues that we've talked about, but it covers sort of fringe science, sort of forward thinking, advanced technologies. You've written about a couple of things that I looked up before this, contacts that let you see at night and all sorts of fun things. So what are maybe including the UFO space, but just sort of looking forward, what do you see on the horizon as kind of the big things that we are not talking about enough that we should be talking about?
That's a great question. There, as you said, there's so many intersections between edge science and UAP. So that's what I try to focus on, or a lot of the intersections of that. Also just like intersections of culture and advanced science and for frontier science, edge science, you can call it. But I think that the funding for UAP and UAP research will get stronger and stronger. And we're seeing that. So as time goes on, I think that we'll see so much funding that will be adjacent to UAP, because the more that we fund that type of technology, I think the more that will probably lead to understanding UAP as well. And we do see it. I know the National Science Foundation is funding so much around UAP technology. Not a huge, massive amount, but enough, along with then all the others edge science that they're funding. So it's exciting. And I think that we should be optimistic about edge science. I think what I was saying before is that some people are saying that we don't have accurate science and that our science isn't real and what we told us isn't real. And I don't know if that's true. We understand, basic science. We wouldn't be here in technology, and people wouldn't be living to date if we really didn't understand science and what bacteria was and other things. I think that's just ridiculous to say. So I think that, but I will say that we are learning more and we're advancing, and the intersections are just going to be blurred more and more. And everything that we're going to do is going to look like sci fi. And I'm so here for all that, like every day, all day.
Yeah, no, I'm once and forever, tech toy nerd. It's funny that I now work in AI and at Filter Labs because I'm this policy wonk, who's now at a tech startup, and I talk to our data scientist, and I'm like, "You're doing what? How? That's crazy. I didn't even know agentic architecture to do this." And so I'm totally there with you, and I also think that there's this like oftentimes you talk about technologies as being dual use or triple use or something like that. And so, hey, if somebody's developing a technology to try to understand some sort of UAP, unknown phenomenon, and it has the side benefit of allowing us to do this other hard problem, to get at this other hard problem, then I'm no historian, but I'm guessing that a lot of the advancements in science in our lifetime and beyond have been because we were sort of looking in one direction and there was this like slight other thing that seemed interesting. So I'm here for all the edge science. I think it's really interesting. Does AI come into your world at all,
Oh gosh.
Chrissy? Okay.
Oh
How does
yeah.
how does it come into your world?
So I've written about AI and government policy. That's mainly what have focused on, and looking at. I did a piece around a recent study from Penn State where it talks about how AI will potentially, if there's biases in it, and how if we don't look at that and use policy behind to be able to shape that for everyone and regulations, we might have a problem on our hands. And I look back to social media when we didn't have any guidelines when that first came into play and there was no policy. So we talk about the implications within that piece that I do, feature piece. And Penn State actually used it and sent a press release out around it, which I was like, thank you. It's really nice. And yeah, it was a thank you, felt like, to them, being like, we really enjoyed that feature article and thank you for taking our study, but expanding on it. But it's something that I do care about. Like the more it's so funny, the more that I'm in UFOs, the deeper I get into all these other places, but the deeper I get into national security and policy consistently. I think it's maybe I was a lawyer in my past life. I don't know. Because I think it's so fascinating. And that's something that I know that, someone said to me once when I was in California and I was out for dinner with him, and he was a lawyer, and he said, Chrissy, if you really want to affect change, he's like, you need to go affect policy. And I was like, it's a good point. And he was right. So the more that I look at that, the more that I can write about that, I feel that's I can contribute, but at least educating people on that and being able to have an understanding that they can have a say in how to shape policy, and they can have a say in how these things happen. They just have to be aware of it before the policy is obviously written.
Yeah, I mean, look, I live in Washington D.C. and ultimately, you know, I look back at, I don't know, 7 or 8 year old Errol, and Errol wanted to change the world. And I thought, going someplace and helping people was the way to do it. And that it is and remains true, but also the way to do it at scale is good policy. And as an American, where does good foreign policy happen? Where does bad policy happen? where does all policy happen for, on the international scale, at least it's DC, and that's kind of why drew me here. So I'm with that California friend. I think that's um I very much resonate with that. When you travel around, Chrissy, how do you? I'm assuming you go to conferences, you speak at various gatherings. Obviously, you've got this. You're highly Googleable these days, I'm guessing, and so when do people recognize you? What do you talk to them about when you're on an airplane sitting next to them, for example?
I was saying this, we were saying off before just recording. I love having conversations with people in planes. Like, I swear if I ever did a TV show, it's not Cars and Coffees, it's like Chrissy in Planes, conversations in planes. Uh, I always find that I sit beside the most interesting people. In the recent years of my life, it's been a lot of government people. And I do feel that they may have an attraction thing that's going on because I'm working so close and I know so many people in government now that, as I grow and meet people that have formerly worked in Pentagon or still do, it's like I feel like, yeah, they're like a magnet. So I've had conversations with people. It's been from people I've worked in the Navy, Navy SEALs, commanders of ships. I think I told you adjacent to like corporate companies of like a whole row of people were from Lockheed Martin, which I think is hilarious. I've worked with somebody who's done targeted bomb dropping. I've talked to so many different people in intelligence now on planes, and I'm like, is this you following me? You wonder, but then no, I don't really think they are. I think we're all just end up sitting beside each other. But it's been very common. So the things that they usually ask me is like, what do I do? So I don't really kind of go off the hop and be like, well, I talk about UFOs,
Well, yeah.
well, and then if they do, I usually kind of drop it later, right, into a conversation, depending on who I'm chatting with. Uh, and especially like someone who did targeted bomb dropping, we were talking from a like where are satellites in perspective, and some things he obviously can't tell me, right? As an intelligence officer. So I think that I'm having so many different conversations, usually depending on the person. Like with someone who commanded like a ship, it was like 22. He was so young and he was flying off the coast of Japan. And I was just like, how did you become, like a head of a ship at this age? Like it's such a young age. So really it's just a array of things. But I end up finding we just have these really deep conversations. And I've had ones from like 3 hours up to 5 hours straight. And I'm just curious. Like that's why my show is Rebelliously Curious, because I really do like people and I really like learning about their lives and also picking their brains because people are so fascinating and you can learn so much from them, right? Like just the average person, everyone's like has a story and their whole lives are stories. Like everyone's life is like pretty much a movie. So you meet these people that are very not in the forefront, but they want to share their information and they're friendly. And I think that's just a great way to connect. And you can talk about yourself, but you also are, if you do get into UFOs at the point I do, then we're talking about a broader subject, which I think is always great because you kind of just going back and forth in what you think is going on. And that's even more fun at times.
I bet you get great joy out of, people assuming that you're one thing, and then when you drop like, "Oh, I'm the world's expert in UFOs," like 45 minutes into the conversation, they're like, "I'm sorry, what?"
Well, I wouldn't say world UFO. I don't say world, but I think when they say I don't even call myself an expert, and I'm an expert adjacent to it, like in many things that contribute to the UFO topic that I can help with. But yeah, it's most of the time. It's usually because I'm a woman. That surprisingly, gender still plays a big part of it. Or when I talk about science or tech or anything, most of the time we're like, or even history, like past history. I know a lot about World War II because I actually watch a lot on war documentaries. Surprisingly, like I just enjoy them so much, and I don't think people really get that when they meet me, like, or when they see me. So I think that's kind of funny because they just have an assumption of what women like myself would probably be like. So they're usually shocked, I think, by my gender, which I think is like kind of archaic, but they're like, "Oh, I didn't think a woman would like those things." And I'm like, "Well, we do. We love them." And I have lots of women in my life that love stuff and I discuss World War II stuff with them, and we talk about our funny little nuggets in history because one of my best friends, one thing that we love to do is to find nuggets in history, but make it palatable for people. So make it fun. So you find this little nugget, and the way that you deliver it to people is so conversational that they're like, wow. And then you know that they're going to go share that nugget. So we'll do that. Sometimes we leave each other voice notes of just like little information nuggets that are just funny history tidbits that we think are digestible for people.
I love that. So if you could leave a nugget for our listeners as we come to the end of this episode, what would one nugget be that you want folks to take with them?
Well, I'll give you a World War II nugget that I think is really interesting. It's a Churchill nugget. I think it's a funny one to me because I watched a documentary and I was reading so much more about him. And I think funny Churchill when he ended up going to the White House, but he ended up staying in the White House for I believe a couple months and became like best friends, right, with Roosevelt, and they were running around together like, you know, BFFs, I think was hilarious, right? So he ends up moving in, but he takes over the second floor of the White House. And apparently he brought all of his stuff and all of his people, but he would walk around naked. And I thought that was the funniest thing.
It's a power move.
It's totally a power move, but it's interesting because he was so funny though. Like he loved people. Like he was a controversial man and he wasn't anything of, not making mistakes himself. But outside of it, he tried his best and he learned and he grew. But he was very comical. So I think outside the power move, it was done in a place of comedy. I think. And also, like, they would go into the war room with each other. And it was just, I couldn't even imagine being the first lady with like these two men that one is a prime minister and one is the president, and they're best friends and they're, planning this war. It would just be like, it literally would be having like two adult children running around, and especially one that's being naked. So.
And one of them happens to be the president.
Right. That's the thing. It's just, well, and I think the other part is that I feel bad for Churchill too, because he was pushed out of that circle. So Stalin, the three of them were really close at one point in time, as close as you could be as a dictator too. But I felt bad for Winston Churchill because they pushed him out of the three-way friendship group. And you could tell, and they made fun of him and they would isolate him, right? Like, it's pretty wild. So you see this evolution of this man that then later on, ends up meeting with Stalin himself and builds this relationship outside of having even the White House or the American government attached to it, and starts, kind of sits up and says, you know what, I'm going to be taken seriously now. So I have a real soft spot for Winston Churchill.
Well, that's quite a fun nugget. I look forward to sitting next to you randomly on a plane at some point, Chrissy, and we will exchange many more nuggets, I'm sure. Thank you so much for taking the time. Chrissy Newton is host of the Rebelliously Curious podcast. She's a partner at The Debrief and a regular contributor, and the host of Discovery Channel's new show, Alien Encounters, Fact or Fiction. Chrissy, thank you again for joining Navigating Noise.
Thank you for having me.